Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of RealAg Live. I'm your host Sean Haney, founder of RealAgriculture.com and host of RealAg Radio. You can hear every day on Rural Radio 147 on Sirius XM. And if you don't have Sirius, make sure you download the podcast. Today's guest is Aaron Stevanus of Mosiac Company. Hey Aaron, how's it going? Great.
How are you doing, Sean?
Good, man. Good. Hey, I'm just glad that I'm interviewing somebody that has a bigger headset than me.
It's all about quality, eh? You know, you got to go big or go home, and you got to make sure you can hear everybody, and your audio is good.
Yeah, I've been hearing from a lot of people that they've been really happy with the sound that we have been putting out on these live broadcasts. So we've really tried to make the best effort we can. Actually, on Tuesday, it was Tuesday, we lost JP Gervais in the middle. So hopefully I had to really scramble, but we got him back. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion. Hey, a lot of growers out east are looking at hitting the field, trying to figure out, is this the right time to go, no go? I know I talked to Eric Dietrich. He's out of Lucan today for the Farmer Rapid Fire on RealAg Radio, and they got 30% of their corn planted. So some growers are off to a lightning good start.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the conditions have been fantastic. Field conditions have been awesome. The biggest challenge was always been, well, what's the soil temperature like? And it has been cooler because we haven't had a lot of really warm days. I mean, or it gets warm and then it cools down. And so really, when you look at corn, we do like to be in that, 50 Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius for soil temp to make sure that you already had a piece on that about seed water imbibition, so making sure that it's not too cold and the disruption of some of those processes that can happen. But seed treatments do also help us through some of these cooler soils. So it's good to get things in the ground. It really reminds me of 2012, where we were kind of like pushing stuff really early, and you'd get some acres in. And then should I keep going? And it ended up paying out great benefits at the end. So let's hope that's what we get this year.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's so much different than last year that it almost feels a bit odd. It's almost like our memories are so short. It's like, well, yeah, but last year was so bad. It's like, okay, we have had good springs before. It's okay to admit it. So you mentioned soil temperature, okay? Yep. And I was talking to Greg Stewart last week from Mosiac, and we were talking about, he's more like, you know what? I'm more worried about the cold water, as you mentioned, than I am about cooler soil temperatures. Are you on that wagon, or you got a different point of view?
No, I'd agree with that, because it is that, like, you get a cool rain. So where I am here in Elmira, Ontario, we got a nice rain over the evening into the morning today, and the temperature actually wasn't too bad. Like, when I woke up, it was 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, so it wasn't the end of the world for temp, and it wasn't like it was a borderline snow. And so I planted corn yesterday, and really happy that I did. Wasn't too cold of water, so I agree with Greg 100%. The interesting thing about soil temperature is I have a smart firmer on my planter, and it was amazing to watch. We have lighter soil, sandy loam soil, and when I started probably around 1 o'clock, the soil temperature was less than 50 Fahrenheit. When I finished, it was 65 to 70.
Oh, wow.
So that, especially in sands, they can vary. They can go up fast. They can go down fast. So just something to be mindful of. But yes, I do agree on the moisture comment.
Yeah, there's all these rules that people have, right? For some, I remember, I'll never forget, it was a farmer from Sarnia talked about tree frogs. I know that some people wait for the buds on the trees. Yep. There's always they spot some animal. There's all these rules about when to go. But I think for the most part, we know when it's the right time based on past experience.
Yeah. And I would say definitely, like every year, even though we talk about it time and time again, don't make decisions based on last year. That is a big part of us wanting to push, because we got bit hard last year. And in general, it was okay. But considering the circumstances and depending where you were, I should say that, it was very variable across Ontario, the eastern part of Quebec and the Maritimes and the West. It was very dynamic on wherever you were. So I still think getting in earlier, the better.
Okay, so right now when we look at the markets, corn not exactly leading the charge higher for a lot of these commodities here in the ag commodity complex. From a fertility standpoint, we got to be careful and manage what we do here, because it can be really easy to make a rash decision and say, you know what, we're pulling back hard. Yeah. And you never know, right? What can happen out there, and you lighten up too heavy at the beginning to cut some costs. And I can't blame you for wanting to cut some costs. But you got to be careful what you cut, because you don't want to hurt yourself when it gets to November and you're, woulda, coulda, shoulda. And I've kind of maybe overreacted a little bit. Yeah,
no, I agree 100%. It's always seems to be when crop prices are down, especially this time of year, because in general, statistically, they usually go down around planting time. And we usually see that you'll see a decrease in fertility. It seems the first thing to cut. And I would argue that's probably one of the least things you want to cut, especially if you look at some of Horst Bonner's trials on soybeans, looking at just that build of soil fertility. So if you have a well-built soil, your response is much better. Your yields are going to be much better. So we don't want to cut back into that fertility bank. And I always like to look at fertility as a bank account. So it's that classic, whatever you put in, you take out. And if you say you have less money than you're spending, then you're in trouble. And it's the same with crop fertility. And, crop prices may be lower, but it's also one of the best times to invest in fertility, because in general, fertility prices are lower than they have been for the past, say, 5-10 years. So for sure, 5 years, sorry. So it's a good time to invest on a return on investment of that fertility.
Yeah. If anybody has any questions for Aaron, make sure you type them in the comment box, whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, what do we got? Twitter. I think actually today we're broadcasting on LinkedIn as well. So
that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's exciting.
We're all over the place today. So good stuff. So Aaron, when you are making that fertilizer decision, what are some of the numbers that you crunch or you recommend crunching that growers kind of go through?
Well, I think the first thing, it always starts with the soil test. And, talking to Wheat Pete and others in the industry, in Canada specifically, we really need to do a better job on soil testing. Only half of our soils in Canada are soil tested. And I think we need to do a better job of that, because that's how we truly can have good balanced crop nutrition, is by knowing the report card of our soil and where it needs to be and where we need a fertilizer. So that's number one. Number two is looking at your average yields. And I say average because I'm just as much to blame as this. I drive, say, for 200 bushel crop of corn. And I've learned over time that maybe that's not a field that can produce 200 bushel corn. It's a limiting factor, say moisture, or drainage, or lack of moisture because it's too dry. So it's having a real understanding of your average yield, and then taking your removal. So essentially, there's lots of charts out there that'll show your crop removal, and making sure you're putting that into your plan for fertility. And then it comes into the whole soil test and the art of the soil test. This is why I always think we undervalue our agronomists and retailers. They do a great job of putting together plans for us growers, and we really need to take advantage of that, because they do a good job of putting where fertility needs to be based on the soil test. And just like us, we need balanced nutrition to keep ourselves going. Crops need balanced crop nutrition to keep themselves going as well. And that's from macronutrients all the way to micronutrients.
Yeah, for sure. Good point. Question here from Brian, who I think has actually not missed a single broadcast yet. So thanks a lot, Brian, for tuning in. With the lack of fall field work in the U.S. last fall, are we at risk of having a logistics issue with getting spring fertilizer in the U.S. and Canada? Aaron, I know this has been a big point of discussion, especially with the COVID-19 situation, yes. Which has actually added to the complexity of this. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. It's always a challenge when we have those wet falls, and we need to get field work done, especially on the broadcasting side of things. And I'm just going to say, you got to work the best you can with your retailer. They're getting product out as fast as they can. If you're applying it, or if it's custom applied, take care of your retailer because they're trying their best. It's a busy spring, and we want to make sure that we can get everything out as much as we can. So it's having a plan, and then a plan B and a plan C, especially in a time like this where it seems to be we're moving quickly. And so what I mean by a plan A, okay, yes, you'd like to get that field work done, broadcasting your nutrients like would want to, but maybe you might have some logistical issues. Prioritize what needs to get done first. So if it's field work, if you need to work that field, get that field worked, and then come up with a plan B on how to get that fertility either broadcast in crop, broadcast just before planting. Make sure you have a plan so you can see that through. Is the best advice I can get. I know it's challenging times with COVID and having an early spring, so it's a challenge no matter what.
Well, I know Fertilizer Canada has put out, I'm going to say it's like 3 statements recently. It's for sure 2, but I think it's 3. 3 statements basically saying, like, they expect something like 95% of their supply, the required supply, to be in the right spot at the right times at the retail point. So that, that they've been encouraging in some of their messaging. So I know going back 6 weeks, 8 weeks ago, there was a lot more concern in the marketplace. It really seems like that's kind of dissipated a little bit. Brian, as a follow-up, at what point could acres start to shift if there's an issue with availability? I think we're going to see a bit of an acre shift to soybeans anyways, especially after that USDA report that came out. What do you think, Aaron?
That's a great question, and I don't have anything to really back it up, concrete evidence. I would agree with you, Sean, in the sense of a swing in acres would be more based on commodity prices and what essentially the demand for those products are based on the reports we get from a global basis, because there's going to be so many factors in general as we move through COVID. So I wish I could give a really good answer to that, but unfortunately I can't.
Yeah, I'm going to. Yeah, because they had speculated 97 million acres of corn in the U.S. I've heard numerous anecdotal reports from media as far as, talking to retailers saying people are switching to beans, and they were going to anyway. Look how, corn's just bouncing off of $3 due to some of the ethanol issues, livestock demand. So there's a lot of things working against corn. Obviously, if China starts to start ripping and buying here before some of the planting gets completed, that would be a different story. But as of right now, it looks to be a bit of a switch to beans. How many? Who knows? That's the new debate, I guess. Most people taking the under, though, on the 97 million. And from an Ontario perspective, a lot of the growers, I've been doing the Farmer Rapid Fire every Thursday on RealAg Radio, and every time I talk to an Ontario grower, they're like, no, I'm sticking with what I got. So I don't see much of an acre shift in Ontario at all.
No, and it really comes down, if you want to look at it from an agronomic aspect, keeping your crop rotation is probably one of the best things you can do. We've seen it, studies in Ontario time and time again. If we can keep that corn, soy, wheat rotation, or if you go north, throw canola in there, that the more diverse you can get your rotation, the better you're going to have profitability in the long term. So I know this, hopefully, we don't know how big of a hiccup this is going to be with COVID and what's going to happen, but sometimes just keeping that rotation is the best thing agronomically.
Well, you know what? I always make fun of some of you people out east because you talk about rotation. It's like, I've got a big rotation. I've added some wheat. Right? I've got, I talked to John Kowalchuk today, farmer from Rumsey, Alberta. He's got, get ready for it, Aaron, 6 crops in his rotation. Take that.
I believe it. Hey, it's always better in the West, right?
we're just looking for that next thing all the time.
It is. Oh, hey, and I wish we do on our farm. We do have a pretty diverse cropping rotation because of our small scale vegetables. So it always makes life interesting, especially when my dad makes decisions in March.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, this might be outside of your wheelhouse, but I'm going to ask it. Avery asks, what are your thoughts on radishes, oilseed / tillage? Have you seen anyone planting radishes in 15 or 30-inch rows, then planting their corn next to that dead row in the spring? Go for it.
Okay. Are we talking corn or soybeans?
I just read exactly what he typed.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's a cover crop, and then you're kind of doing like a bio strip for that. I personally have done that. I did a trial, very small trial at my place, so I can speak to that experience. It seemed to work really well. The one thing I will say is sometimes because you have that degradation of the radish, you can potentially have higher pest pressure because pests in the early spring are always drawn to carbon dioxide. That's as they release it, that's what they're drawn to. And so that they will come and start feeding off that radish. You put a seed next to it, all of a sudden when you start the germination process, then they're going to be drawn to the seed. So there is a higher chance potentially of insect feeding on the seed. So that's where I kind of, that's my biggest caution. But I'd say if you're really looking to try something, hey, it's cover crops are the new thing. Do it on a small acreage and maybe away from the road. So just in case it doesn't work, then you don't have to just tell everybody why.
Well, or you can't. What was another one? I was talking to somebody this week. It's like, bad stuff always happens beside the road or the field. Oh, I know. I was talking to Doug Alderman from Pride Seeds on Monday for Agronomic Monday. And Doug said it's either on the highway or you can see it through your house, like your living room window in the field behind the house. And you get home at night and you had just a long day. It's like, now you got to look at that field where you tried that stupid thing and it screwed up.
All year long.
Regrettably.
But you always learn from those situations.
It's a learning experience. Yeah. Dad, what happened over there? I don't even want to talk about it. Dad, I thought the corn was supposed to be tall. Yes, it was. Yes, that is true. That's mini corn, son.
Yeah.
Mini corn.
So how about them Blue Jays?
Yeah, exactly. Dad, they're not even playing. Oh yeah, right. Okay, let's talk about the mini corn again. Hey, you were talking about nutrients. You mentioned micros. Need to make sure that they are available throughout the entire growing season.
You bet. And it's so I attribute this to Ross Bender, who is a colleague of mine at Mosiac. He did his PhD with Dr. Fred Bilo, which a lot of people know that name.
Oh, yeah.
And so those graphs that you always see, especially in nitrogen uptake and partitioning, they're always put up, especially as we looked at more late season nitrogen on essentially when it's taken up. So if you look at micronutrients and macronutrients, we need a season-long availability of a lot of nutrients, and some will be able to move nutrients, say, from the leaf into the grain or from the leaf to the growing point easily. Those would be considered mobile nutrients in the plant. Others don't do that. So a micronutrient, for example, that is like that is boron. If you have a boron deficiency, it will show up at the top of the growing point. In the vegetative state, because that means it is deficient there and you cannot move any nutrients from the bottom of the plant. You can't rob from Peter to pay Paul, essentially. We're unlike the opposite, nitrogen. You always get nitrogen deficient on the bottom of the plant because it moves to the top. So quick 101 on that. We need availability of nutrients all the way through the season, and Ross came up with a really good analogy of talking about that, and that's the 3 Ds. So when we look at just that whole making sure that we have any nutrient available is the 3 Ds. So we have distribution, so making sure it's distributed well throughout the whole field. We have duration of use, so that's that curve of when are we taking up the nutrients throughout the season. And then we have daily use, so how much of that nutrient are we using throughout the season. And fun little fact is that in that rapid growth stage of corn, so when we see corn, it's like we joke that you can watch it grow throughout the day. We're taking up, specifically on potash and boron, we're taking up 9 pounds of potash and about 16 granules of boron, of product boron. So once again, the reason why I bring in that analogy is it comes to that distribution. So I do have a prop. Don't want to make it awkward.
As you should have props. Who doesn't? What guests don't have props?
This is 9 pounds of potash, and this would be the granules of boron, right?
Okay.
So if we're distributing that over a field, we're going to get lots of potash. We're not going to get a lot of boron. But if you combine the two together, if you can get this amount of boron and this amount of potash, right, the distribution across the field is perfect.
Yeah.
Essentially. So we have little commercial product like Aspire that takes care of that. So it's making sure that you have that adequate crop nutrition all the way through the season, Same thing about sulfur. We can talk about all the nutrients, but it's making sure you have a plan. If you're deficient in something like boron, having something available all the way through the season so you can maximize your yield, because it is one of the fertility nutrients. So we want it for flowering in corn, for example.
What's your when I listen to some of the growers that do a lot of speaking, like on big yield, like with the Dowdies or the Hefties or any of that group, they talk a lot about tissue testing. And I traveled across Western Canada for a whole week with Randy Dowdy, and he talked a lot about tissue testing. Although I would say not everybody is sold. That there's a lot of people that are like, yeah, I test tissue testing every week. Seems, one, laborious, and two, what am I testing against?
Yeah.
What do you think?
So, to his defense on that, his whole model was to look outside of the box of our standard practice of how to grow crops. So, what he wanted to do in that, his feeling was, and he's got the data to kind of back it up, is that where our tissue tests say that we are, say, sufficient or deficient or adequate or too much, is based on essentially 150 bushel corn. So where he's looking to push yields beyond where we have, and you can see him and Dave Hula back and forth, sparring to win that NCGA title. He was looking to say, where are these next levels, because we don't have that. And I think that good for him. He did that, and I think he did find some interesting facts out of that. From a production agriculture standpoint, that's not realistic. That's pretty costly, and I don't think that's where we need to be. Somewhere in the middle, if you want to do tissue testing.
Yeah. What should I do? Like, if I'm a commercial grower, I'm just looking to make some good decisions. How often should I be tissue testing?
I still think it comes back down to that plan, right? Because it is a snapshot of what's going on at that point in time. So if you don't have an action plan to take care of, say, something that's deficient, you just spent that money to do what? To know what you were deficient at, and maybe you can have a plan to apply it later in the season, like in, say, after harvest or for the next year. But if you don't have anything that you can do, take action right then essentially your knowledge is just as good as a soil test. So I would say if you are intending to do tissue testing, it does have a place. You just have to make sure you have an action plan to use whatever information you're going to get and essentially act on it.
Yeah. I think it's one that everyone's still trying to kind of figure out, right? And so it's sort of like precision ag, where it's like, okay, so go out there, tissue test every week. Like, it's a great story. It sounds really good. But, I think the gap that's missing for a lot of growers is what to actually do with that information, right? Mm-hmm. It's no different than with precision ag, where, hey, I'm collecting all this data. I've got all this stuff, and I got all these feeds coming in, and I got it all figured out. And the reality is that I'm really doing nothing with that data, but it sounds really good. And that's kind of how I put this. It's kind of in the same ballpark. Not to say it's wrong, but we haven't quite figured it out yet on what actually to do with it. Like, that's kind of how I see it. I don't know.
Well, and the other part of it too is you can really look at it. Like I said, it's that snapshot, right? So let's say it's dry. And let's go back to boron. Boron's a mass flow nutrient, like nitrogen. It's taken up with moisture. And so if we don't have adequate soil moisture, the ability to take up boron it's just not there. The ability to move it into the plant isn't there. So we could have a boron deficiency. We could have fertilized for boron, and it's just not the ability to get into the plant is not there. Yeah. So it could be a false positive, right? You get rain, take another tissue test, and boom, there's enough boron in the plant again. So there's definitely lots of factors you need to take in, and it really comes down to, I think, that practicality of knowing, once again, that strategic plan, but also being mindful of the environment and what's going on in the plant and in the soil at that time.
Remember we were talking about Avery's question earlier about the radishes and about where we would put a trial? He replied and said, or she, I'm not sure, I'll put it in the field next to the 417, thanks. Yeah, there you go.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Make sure you earmark it. I want to drive. Well, if I can drive by it, we'll see.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, one thing we didn't talk about at the beginning that I wanted to cover was about planter prep.
Yep.
Uber critical. I know this is one of those things where we have to do it every year.
Yes.
We talk about it every year, but we still see mistakes or holes in what should have been done pop up all the time, and then we do have to look at it for the rest of the growing season.
It's true. Yeah, and I like your framing of that. Is looking at it throughout the rest of the growing season, because it's that classic thing that all of our parents have told us is you only have one chance to put the crop in the year. Hopefully you don't have to replant it, but one chance. Do it right the first time, and if not, you get to look at it all year long. And so, yes, planter maintenance is very important. And there's tons of different tips and tricks out there. Precision Planting does a great job of just outlining everything. RealAg, you had a fantastic one, I believe, with his name. I forgot his name, but
from Kearney.
Yes.
Yeah.
He does a great job of just a planter clinic, and also on your videos describing what you should do. And it sometimes is as easy as when you're going out and greasing everything, just make sure everything's working properly. Make sure your gauge wheels are tight to your opening discs, because that's one of the ones I always see. And I always work on, we have an older planter. It's a 7000 John Deere with lots of precision plan on it, but still it's older, and I always have to adjust my gauge wheels throughout the season, because it'll loosen up a bit on the arm connecting it to the planter unit, and I'll get some dry soil from the top coming in beside that gauge wheel and into the seed trench, which is essentially going to delay germination, because you're putting dry soil on top of that seed. So it's just little things like that can just make a huge difference later in the season.
Avery reminded us it was Sean Dilliot.
Oh, Sean Dillett. Thank you very much, Avery. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. At least Avery knows what's going on here. It was in a recent Corn School episode, so you go to cornschool.com and check it out. Yeah, I don't know who's running the ship, but it's somebody out of control. I don't know what's going on. But but I'll be honest with you, as somebody that grew up in Western Canada, when I first started going to Ontario in 2010, it blew me away how in the West we don't have air seeder clinics. Mm-hmm. Right, but it's a different crop, and we know that with corn, those little slight mistakes are there. They show up at a way they're expressed way more than if you make that mistake when you're seeding canola or wheat. Right, it's just Absolutely. It's different, and it took me a while to get used to that or kind of figure that out, but it is just so true.
It is so true. Corn. It can handle stress if it's done properly. So if you've put it into good planting conditions, if your planter's been set up properly, you don't have any sidewall compaction, your soil has been prepped right. If everything's done right, sure, it can actually handle stress very well, especially drought conditions. It's amazing what these new hybrids and new genetics can do to make it through that. But if that is not everything else before that's not done properly, then it's a world of hurt. Yeah, you see things quickly.
Okay, so one of the questions that I was talking to a grower about yesterday, with this good weather, do you forge ahead and keep on planting corn till you're done, then switch to beans, or do you put some beans in?
I am all for, I know Horst, I'm sure I'll hear from him later on, but I'm all for get the corn in. I do get a little more concerned about soybeans and so the soil moisture temperature and taking that cool drink. I know I'm looking at when I plant my soybeans and I see a 0 in the overnight temperature or 32 Fahrenheit for our American friends out there. That scares me a lot. It's just way too much of a chance on losing soil, our seed vigor, and having that same imbibitional chilling. Same thing with corn. They're just a little bit more sensitive to colder soils than corn is, and I just rather keep the soybeans in the bag and get the corn planted.
Yeah, good, interesting thoughts. Hey, Aaron, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody that sent in their questions. I think next week, with everybody kind of planting, we may try some prime time episodes, like RealAg at supper or something like that. But we'll see. We're just testing and trialing, and I really appreciate everybody that tuned in. Appreciate it very, very much. I know everybody's working hard in the fields or trying to get to the point where they can put some seed in the ground, depending where you are. Make sure you check out the episode of RealAg Radio today. We do a farmer rapid fire, talk to farmers across the country, and you can really see how diverse the country is, and so many farmers dealing with so many different things, including still trying to finish the 2019 harvest, which is absolutely heartbreaking and incredible for some of the growers out there that are trying to get that completed. Aaron, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Hey, appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the time, and good planning to everybody out there. So have a safe and happy spring.